kind of what we'll be doing tonight here. We've got really 4 major topics that we're going to be going over. First one is setting clear goals. So understanding what the goal for your calf is. This is a cattle heavy presentation here tonight, or Facebook Live here tonight. So setting clear goals, understanding, what your target shows are. You might have more than one show, right? We'll maybe talk about that a little bit as well. Second would be assessing your calf's current condition and what to be looking for and how to feed and manage that animal moving forward throughout the rest of the summer. Number 3, what work you should or shouldn't be doing now. So a lot of parents maybe want to hear the work kids should be doing, and a lot of kids maybe want to hear the work they shouldn't. So want to kind of find the fine line there on what we need to be doing moving forward, and maybe what we need to be stepping away from or not doing just quite yet. So, and then the last part is going to be understanding the hair cycle. A lot of folks talk about that. Obviously, show cattle, we talk about hair. It's a big deal. It's part of the the beauty pageant side of the equation of showing livestock, and so we want to be talking about that a little bit as well, because of course it's going to be a little Midwestern themed, a little bit in terms of some timelines, but it doesn't matter where you live. It's all relative. Just make it fit your schedule and make it work for you. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and start with our first topic here, setting clear goals. And so kind of the first one that I kind of started out, just threw out there, would be, how many days until your target show would be a pretty good place to start there, Nick.
Yeah, and I want to tee this up initially, kind of broad strokes with, if you have any questions through this at any point in time, please jump in here in the chat. We would love to answer those as we go. And then at the very end, if you had something that maybe doesn't quite fit in with the topic, we certainly will stay on and answer some questions there. But like the informality of these Facebook Lives, and now we can kind of just have a discussion about more or less whatever we want to. We do have a goal in mind or have topics in mind. But whatever your questions are tonight, we're hoping we can answer those for you. So setting clear goals. And I think in any show project, that's something you got to sit down with your family, with your ag teacher, whoever that person is, or whoever your team is that kind of helps you from start to finish on your project, and decide what you want to do. Maybe it's we were in the middle of our class last year at our county fair, and we just want to win our class this year. I think that's an awesome goal and something that can certainly be achieved with some minor changes, in all honesty. Or maybe, we won our breed last year at our state fair even, and this year we want to try to get in the top 5. So how can we make those fine-tuning changes to push us into that next level? And I think those are different things that we can discuss here tonight. The big one here, and how many days are you out from your show? That's, I guess, not necessarily sex specific. On steers, you really have to know that so you can get your weight of gain locked in and try to have a goal in mind as far as a good kind of end weight. But on heifers too, I think it's good to know that, because there's kind of a push and pull aspect of feeding heifers that if you know your timeline and how far out you are, then you can really put in place, hey, we're kind of just hanging out and we're coasting right now and working on our hair. And then here in this last insert timeline, we're going to kind of mash the pedal and try to get them bloomed up and ready from a condition standpoint. And so I think it's very important to know how far out you are from your show. And that may be a shot more complicated, and we'll get into kind of the complexities tonight. Maybe you want to show at a couple different places this summer. Maybe you want to show a heifer at junior nationals, but you also want to take that same heifer to your state fair. And how do we do that? And so I think it's important to know those things. You maybe won't get them quite as ready or maxed out at junior nationals if then you want to have kind of a second push to your state fair. And so having those different kind of timelines put in place, and I think it's smart to even put them on a calendar. Do you guys do that in your barns? I know you're maybe a little more hog focused, but I think it's good to have a legitimate
Brad, what
calendar.
do you do? Yeah.
Well, I think as far as setting clear goals, I mean, we all want to win. I mean, that is what our ultimate focus tends to narrow it down, right? Like where, the idea And, when we sit around talking about feeding technologies or strategies, it's all around winning, right? But I have to be honest, like when we put livestock on feed for our kids, that's really not the sole focus right in the beginning. I would tell you, as far as setting goals go, I've got a 10 and a 12-year-old, and I want to give them things that they are in control of, right? And the truth of it is, if we don't win, there'll be failure somewhere, right? It'll be failure on maybe the genetic plan of that animal. Maybe it's on I didn't pick out the one that I can feed the best or give the best strategy. Maybe it is on our effort, right? But I want to be able at the end of the year to say, okay, we can springboard off of a failure. We learned from some problem that maybe our genetics didn't line up with our feeding strategy, right? Or maybe we just didn't work hard enough. And where I would come from with that is I would have very long-term goals that we can measure as a family. I can tell you, looking back, man, I know you guys feel the same way. I showed cattle in high school here, and one of the most successful people, probably ever buying cattle down here, got my calf for me my senior year. And I think back to what he was trying to teach me about using a right root brush and how to blow and all this different stuff, and just really not understanding it. But as an adult, I look back and, man, I think just maybe our goal this year is to correctly learn how to blow out a calf. When you go to the calf when you see cattle that look totally fresher and different than what yours are, maybe that's y'all's goal as a family, is to really climb this one little mountain. So whatever that is, as a family, as a show team, whatever you want to call it, I would set a long-term goal. Hey, by the end of this year, we're going to have this figured out. Maybe it's like in the pig side, we are going to have, great backs at shows this year. Maybe with cattle, we're going to have fresh hair, and we're not going to have some coarse-legged thing that's been pulled up with a curry comb. Like, we're going to actually have really good hind legs. And what I'm saying is give yourself the time to figure that out and chase down the people, like a Nick, that if you go to a show and outside of Sunglo, you see him 2 aisles over, and you're like, man, it seems like every time we come out, their cattle always look this certain way, and I'm sure chasing that look. Yeah, we're going to create all the Facebook Live opportunities to do it, but I would challenge you guys as an industry, like, let's go find those people and get that one thing done. So what I would say as setting clear goals is, I still want us to try to win our state fairs. I would love it if our kids got the opportunity to do something like that. But at the same time, I want something that we can really leave the show and go, okay, Dad, you did a terrible job. Okay, check. But we did our job.
You're not picking our animals next year.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that. All right, boys, did a great job this year. And I'll share that back with breeders where I'm like, hey, man, I just don't think we got it done. And maybe somebody else could have fed that one, but I didn't get it done. And that's okay, right? The breeder doesn't want to raise bad ones either. And so, but that doesn't mean all is lost. And so I would just tell you guys as a family, you dang right, we write it up on the board, but we write those goals up there. When we first started, we wanted to have the best skin and hair in the barn. And you know what? Before the show ever started, we kind of walked through the barn. And it was pretty cool when you've got like an 8-year-old that comes back and be like, hey, I really do think we have the best skin and hair. I'm like, all right, let's celebrate. Let's celebrate hitting that. So that might seem off. But that is so important to really write that stuff down and hold yourself accountable.
To stem off of what you're saying, I think it's important we all have kind of that goal in mind that's somewhat judge evaluation centered of like, we'd like to do this at the show with our animal. But some of the coolest goals as I talk to families is Susie, her goal for this summer is to place in her showmanship heat.
Yep.
And to fit her own front leg on her calf. Like some of those things that you can do and aren't necessarily so centered around how that calf places, I think are also cool goals to have in mind and kind of put the whole project together. So yeah, I completely agree.
I would say too, like maybe your goal this year is to learn how to put belly in cattle without getting them fat, and like truly understand how some cattle, to me, kind of getting into it a little bit. When I'm looking at cattle, in my opinion, what really separates the haves and haves not in terms of cattle that look extremely high quality would be cattle that continually get deeper and more powerful through their center body without getting fatter and staler. And so to me, like that is kind of a next level kind of idea of figuring that out. and not feeding the thing that's the most in front of you. Like, I'm going to get them fat and big belly. Like, what I'm getting at is if that's y'all's goal this year, have it 100% figured out by the end. And I would write those things down. Because like you said, Nick, I mean, we're just not in control. You might buy the best animal you can afford, do an incredible job, and then you pull up to the jackpot show and you see so-and-so's trailer pull in and you go, it's going to be a long day. And that's what we do.
We've all been there.
So, yeah, and I mean, like, we can gripe about the situation. And like I tell my kids all the time, if it's in our control, it's going to be great. If it's out of our control, we're going to try to have a great attitude about it. And at the end of the day, like, we have to understand that great livestock fed correctly are good. Great livestock fed correctly that are presented great are great. And so greatness comes from your home. There's never been an animal that's great that came out of a bad home with bad skin and hair that truly will be talked about as one of the greats. It's the total package. And we, as a show family, are part of that total package. And so isolating ourselves from, the judge's opinion or what somebody else can do, and really breaking things down that we can control as far as what we're good and what we're bad at, and trying to break down that stuff and learn from it is so important. And that is the definition of a good home. That's just somebody that's trying to get better. And so I know from the breeder side of Nick, he is always trying to sell cattle into good homes. I mean, that's what he wants. And that's easy to say. So I just think that's super important, and clearly identifying those would be great. So
yeah, it's always good, and I know that too. Like, one of the things that, and we'll move on here after this, but I know, Brad, that you download that, like, the countdown app on there, so like, whatever your target show is, obviously it's going to be different for every family, but no matter what it is, whether it's the Hamilton County Fair that's July 17th, or if it's the Main and Key Junior Nationals, I think it's great to have that, just so right? Like, either, man, I need to hustle, or, man, I'm okay. Like, I'm in a good spot. Right. So I think having just that countdown app, it's real simple to get. We're all on these stupid phones anyway, so you might as well have something on there that helps you kind of keep you focused.
My wife and I joke on those countdown apps because you can get kind of any number of them, but most of them tell you when you first download them, like, insert your anniversary, insert your family birthdays. Like, nope, don't need any of that. Just looking for a countdown for shows.
Yeah. Or you can just ask Alexa. Like, my 4-year-old wanted to know when his birthday was, and so we asked Alexa tonight when his birthday. It's 111 days till August 8th, in case anybody wants to know that. So. All right, we'll keep rolling. I mean, I think clear goals are critical, and I think that we've got some really great info there. So this was one of the parts of tonight that I'm excited about, because we've got some we've got some really good examples that we can pull up and that we can talk about here. So Nick, if you want to go ahead and take it. And
I think this is probably one of the kind of pillars of tonight, and this is where we'll probably break it down into the different sexes, steers and heifers, and we'll talk first on steers, and you're talking about condition. And so I think part of it is kind of what you've done to this point with your project, and if you've been someone who's gone out and jackpotted heavily, or maybe you got one that's a shot more mature and you've done your job and gotten that one to a good kind of fat cover early, which I think is smart, so you're not chasing. I talk about that often on these Facebook Lives. It's a tough spot to be when you're constantly chasing a weight or a condition. And so to get them to a certain point early and kind of be to a spot where you can maneuver just a little more lightly is a good spot to be. And so if you've done that to this point, realistically right now at this time of year, you're kind of just hanging out and you're coasting. And on a steer, you're probably never pulling them completely off of feed, but you're making sure that they got a good amount of exercise. They're kind of outside. Maybe you're not feeding them quite as hard right now or quite as hot of feed. So that way, whenever you get to that last 90 days, you can then mash the hammer and grab some finisher feed and really start laying down some good fat cover and turning those kind of boys into men, as we talk about pretty regularly. That's one of our phrases here as we're talking about steers, taking them from kind of their immaturity, maybe their younger teenage stage, to the grown men, the fat steers that we're looking for at the end. And so I think it's very important, and not everybody can do it right away. And so if there's someone that you think is good at evaluating livestock or has fed some livestock, or maybe even your breeder who's seen some similar genetics feed out, I would lean into those people and say, here's what my animal looks like right now. Where do you think I'm at condition wise? And how do you think I need to take those steps moving forward? I would say for the most part, you're probably going to be on just our grower feed right now, at this stage of the game, and probably still have some sort of a filler in there. I'm a big proponent of full body. If you're maybe trying to watch calories just a little bit, you could have them on full tank right now, but continually working on body shape is important still on steers. And then you're waiting for that time to kind of turn the reins loose and grab some finisher feed and then get after it. But as we kind of come into these hotter months, I think it's good to be in kind of a sweet spot condition wise on those steers, because as it gets warmer, it gets a little bit more difficult to lay down fat. And I think that's something to keep in mind as we're feeding those steers. On the heifer side, conversely, I would say, again, if you're someone that has, or I guess I'll talk back, sorry, real quick. If you do have a greener or more immature steer, then I think it's also okay right now to be pushing a little bit harder. It's a little cooler out when they can still get out and get some good exercise. If you want to start laying down a little bit more fat cover right now, there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to wait until the last 90 days. And so to kind of use the days that you have as a tool almost, and then again, leaning back into here's my target show. Let's try to move a little closer to what we want this calf to look like from a desired standpoint, like what we want them to look like at the end right now. So again, we're not pushing so hard at the end. On the heifers, for the most part, they're going to kind of just be hanging out right now. And I think in that particular realm, you're constantly staring out at freshness. And that's something that's talked about so heavily in the heifer rings. To me, if you did go out and jackpot early, you're peeling a little bit off right now. You're using that exercise to lean them up a little bit. Maybe you're adding in a product to burn off a little fat, or just using kind of their general maintenance to burn a little bit of fat off of them by pulling back how much you're feeding them. And on those animals, I would say typically you're feeding, again, just kind of a grass hay. And then I still like to keep in either full body or full tank to, again, work on continually expanding that body, adding some depth, like Brad said earlier, but still keeping them fresh. If you have one that's a bit greener or more immature, and I know we have an example of that here in a little bit, it's still okay to be pressing a little bit, but again, constantly watching those visual indicators. And if you're new to showing cattle, I think that's specifically in their chest floor seems like to be one that's talked about pretty heavily. It's kind of in their underline, back in their flank a bit, and then up around their pones. And you can start to read that a little bit too, just up through their front end on their neck and up in their crest, kind of in the wrinkles on their neck. So there's a few different areas that you can look at on those heifers and constantly be watching just general freshness. It's kind of an all-encompassing picture. And I think now is a time where you're trying to get to a pretty desired freshness, because then you're going to have to lean back into them with some feed to add some bloom back on, and just kind of some show readiness here as you get closer to your desired show.
Yeah, I would say, like Nick said, assessing where that condition lays on a calf is getting comfortable around that is really, really important. I'll tell you where it's not. Like, it's not in their belly. I mean, and I say that because it is human nature sometimes when we first get around livestock to see something that's big bellied and go, oh, that thing's fat, and have kind of I hate to use the word juvenile, but kind of a juvenile approach to that. Or if you want to add belly, or, you need to get them fat. I'm not saying that getting them a little bit fatter won't add a little bit of depth. I'm just saying some of the leanest cattle in the country right now are walking out on a pasture with very little body condition on them. Holstein cows are huge bellied. They're super lean. And so not understanding what adds belly and understanding what the purpose of fat is in cattle is important. And I think when you want to add belly or you want to add depth or spring, understanding, how you're going to do that. And then when you want to add condition, and really asking yourself why you want to add condition, if it's on a heifer or if it's on a steer, and understanding what products do that, and really not confusing the two, because you know, I mean, that is so important, because if we just started really feeding them a hot ration to try to really get big bellied, what would end up happening if we pulled forage out of the diet is they'd get really shallow bodied and fat, and you'd really work against what you're trying to do. So one thing I will say, particularly on cattle, is it's more of a baseball season than a football season. I mean, you really got to begin with the end in mind. That is such an important thing, understanding long term how their maturity is going to affect their ability to lay down fat cover.
Yep. I noticed we got a good question over here in the chat, and Robbie is coming to us from Florida, and he's got plenty of time on his hands. He's got 312 days, which that's an awesome time to be thinking and planning. Robbie, you got all the time in the world to kind of make sure that you're set up and ready to put that calf in the best position possible for success. On how to transition, or when to transition, from grower to finishing feed. I wish it was as simple as feed your last bag of grower at 91 days and start feeding finisher at 90 days. But there's probably a little bit more complexity to it. And that's why we're trying to talk about more tonight, just what your animal looks like. And I've known people that start feeding finisher feed early. And when I say early, I mean as a young calf. And maybe that's one that's just a little bit more youthful in their general appearance. And they might feed it the whole way through. It's not a feed that you're going to blow them up or screw anything up majorly. It's just, again, talking about just the different protein levels and fats in there and what your animal requires. And so sometimes I think we get hung up on the name of grower versus finisher. And I'm going to feed grower when I'm growing my calf and finisher at the end. But if we take the names off of those particular feeds and just use them for what their fat content is and what their protein content is, I think we would be able to interchange those just a little bit more and feel more comfortable using either feed earlier or later. I've known instances where a calf is on grower feed the whole way through, and I've known calves that are on finisher feed for a large majority of their life. And we're probably feeding livestock in the steer game that maybe don't get fat quite as easily as they used to. And so if you need to use finisher early, I would say by all means, go ahead and lean into that. And if you feel like then you meet a desired condition and you need to lay back off them, it's okay to then go back to grower towards those last couple weeks to kind of just mellow out and come in at kind of that exact right point too. So again, there's some nuances to it. If that's something you'd like to offline, call us and ask a few more questions on your specific animal or send in a picture. We would love to help you with that. But there's kind of some minor things to take into consideration. But I would say you're not really going to mess anything up going either way with either of those two feeds.
Do you think Nick, do you think this would be a good time to kind of pull up those two different styles of steers? We've got that.
Yeah.
We've got this one dude that's a little clubbier and a little chubbier, right? And then I don't know if we'll be able to shove 5 of them. Oh, yeah, we can. Perfect.
Yeah, these are steers that were fed Sunglo in the past that both actually won their breed at OYE a couple years ago. And we thought they were good examples here. I would tell you the one on the left, still fairly immature, I would say, in his general makeup, but one that's probably not ever going to just be huge. And so you got to be aware of that whenever you're feeding that one. He's a little shorter backed. He's maybe not quite as elevated in his scale. And so there's probably a little bit of a fine line in there of him being a shot more immature than the steer on the right. And so feeding some finisher feed early to try to get a little bit more of a manly appearance, but then knowing that he's not going to ever weigh, 1,400 full and turn him in at 1,360. And so you can't really just get him gross fat. And so I think that's certainly important to keep in mind. The calf on the right, I would say that one probably ate a lot of grower feed. That one's got just a shot more maturity about his head. He looks like he weighs something there, in my opinion, and has a capability of having some chest and maybe shelving off a little bit there in his back. And so making sure that you're keeping track of just his ability to lay down fat and not getting him too fat, I think is pretty important. And two calves that both were fed Sunglo, both came out with quite a bit of success, but both were fed very differently.
Yeah, I was about to say, if you would have got those two calves on the same day in the same age and fed them the same, they would have fed apart.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Just would have fed pretty drastically apart. And so I always like to say, particularly on cattle, is, and it's really with any livestock, is cattle that are getting fat always look good, but when they get fat, you've got a very quick window until they look fat and bad. And so I think both of these cattle, from a freshness standpoint, look really correct, but they could have looked like any calf, where if you get them fat and try to pull it back off of them, I mean, it's hard to manage that. So really, Robbie, on your calf, 312 days out, to touch on what Nick said, is understanding, how big that calf wants to get. And I think what Nick was talking about earlier is so important. Is where do you think he's going to finish out? Is he a 1,200-pound finished calf? Are you trying to win that lightweight class? Is he a 1080 and done? Has he got the genetics like this red calf over here, where he could handle some more size and scale and weight? And so understanding that initially, and it might be okay, like Nick said, to kind of add in some finisher and see where he goes. If he's one that right when you add it in, you really start seeing him fleshing up, well, then you need to back off, because you don't want to be trying to pull it off of him later. But it's interesting just how genetically different they are for the same show. I mean, there is a significant size difference there.
Yeah, and these cattle, they fed just like you'd expect. The one on the left won Division I in the crossbreds at that particular show. The one on the right came out of the last class of the AOBs and certainly did weigh a little bit of something. So kind of just like they look there in terms of their general appearance is kind of how they weighed and went across the scales too at those particular shows.
Well,
and just real quick too, like I also think it's important to understand too, like that family there on the left, I'm sure that they recognize that calf doesn't need to weigh 1,400 pounds to look his best, right? Like,
yeah.
I think sometimes we do this with all species, right? Like we think like we're trying to hit this certain weight because that's last year, that's what the steer weighed that won the show, or the pig. It doesn't matter what species, you can insert whatever. And so in your mind, you're like, well, man, mine needs to weigh 1,400, right? Like mine needs to weigh 1,385 or whatever. But really, like if they push that calf, the one I'm going to use the one on the left specifically, like if they gave that thing everything that he wanted his whole life and fed way too much finisher his whole life too, I mean, they'd be 7th in class weighing 1,320. So instead,
Right.
they were able to manage and understand where that calf's going to look his best. And so, if that's it, I don't know what that calf weighs. If he weighs 1,260, I don't know. If he's weighing that, he can maybe win his class, get a piece of his division. So feed into that window, or attempt to feed into that window where you're going to have the most success, and also recognize what your goal is with that calf. Like I'm sure that they didn't have OIE as the main target show for that calf. Potentially, maybe they did, but they probably didn't go into it thinking, man, we need to play in the big boys, right? Win where you can win. I think is kind of a takeaway here too. All right, so let's really good comments there. Do you want to pull up? Do we want to talk about, Nick, the example that was sent in to us?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hey, do you want to go back? You can do it there. You can do it there.
Yeah, we had this sent in, and I thought it was a good example. It seems like it's a pretty recent picture, and this is a calf that's being fed for a summer show. And so we're just going to talk about kind of what we would do on this particular animal. I would say, just all things considered, if you study that one back into his flank and up around his tail head, he's not laying down just a ton of fat, and he's not completely filled out there in his chest floor. And one that looks like maybe has been just hanging out, and they're working on their exercise and keeping that one loose in terms of movement and adding some depth of body. And now it's time to add in just kind of some condition, start working on our fat cover and how that one will handle, start adding in some protein and turning that one into just a man up top as much as we can. And so to me, if I were feeding this calf, I would start laying into some finisher now and see how that calf responds, and see if we can start to get him to fill out there kind of in his full rib, right in behind his elbow, try to lay down some fat in his upper back, right in there and behind his shoulder, and start adding some general mass down the top side of his skeleton. And I think you'd see along with that feed, in my opinion, works really well on just expanding some muscle and adding some dimension in terms of their center stifle and into their lower quarter, and just some general dimension down their top line. And it does a good job too, laying down a fat that, in my opinion, isn't overly kind of gobby. It lays down a good hard fat all over. And I think in fat steers especially, that's certainly something that you're trying to find. And so to me, I would start feeding some finisher here, see how he responds. And if you get 2 months down the road and you're a month out from your show and you think, hey, we're in a pretty good spot condition wise, it's okay to pull them back just a little bit and go back and visit some of that grower feed, or just kind of move in slower increments. Maybe you back him down in terms of finisher just a little bit. And for instance, we want to add some more upper rib shape. So let's add in some full tank here. I think once you get to that point and you have the right kind of fat cover laid down in the right spots, and you're adding dimension in the correct spots, then you can make, again, some minor changes and kind of tweak some things to make your calf into the best version of himself.
Yeah, thank you for, if you all are watching that sent that one in, I appreciate you guys sending that in. That is one thing that, don't have a ton of folks watching tonight, which is okay, because I know a lot of people go back and rewatch them. We're getting into a lot of stuff from a spring standpoint, soccer practice and baseball games and all that kind of stuff. So I know a lot of folks will go back and rewatch that. But I think one thing that we're going to try to do a lot more moving forward is use some real world examples from our own customers. And so make sure that, we tried to make it known we were going to do that quite a bit tonight. So I want to make sure that moving forward that you guys kind of send some stuff in, because again, like the best way to learn is going to be seeing some other examples as well as your own. So, okay. Do you want to talk about those two heifers, or you want to jump into the what we should be doing now?
We might as well talk about those heifers too. I think we'll have some heifer showmen jump on here as well, and I think it's good to just talk about all of them. So we have two examples here of heifers, and I think at pretty different stages right now, but both are going to try to exhibit this summer at their respective junior nationals. And so the one on the left here, and I can give you the full makeup on these, is a high mane heifer that's younger. She's a May, and one that had some success this spring, but always was just a little bit more juvenile. I think that's one that's going to be awfully good later on in her life, or as a bred, as we talk about in the heifer ring. And so to me right now, and I'm good friends with this family, I would be feeding that one some legitimate feed and continue to work on that one's dimension and making sure that she's still laying down some condition in the right spots. I know we talk about so often in heifers keeping these things fresh, but they still got to have just a little bit of fat in the right spots. And so to continue to work on that one in terms of just dimension, and continue working on her moving to the right kind of maturity, making her look like, that elite show heifer this summer. We're feeding that one some grower feed right now, and then still keeping in there some of those good fillers, the full body, the full tank. They're actually using some to the fullest as well. And so all those things in consideration, for me, she is kind of just hanging out right now in terms of being outside, eating around bale, getting good exercise, but she's still got a little bit of actual feed, some grower in her diet right now to keep her moving in the right direction. The one on the right, and that's actually a fall, and you could kind of use this in the same instance if you have one that's older and a bit more mature. I think it would all kind of fall under the same study here. But that's one that was successful at OYE here about a month ago. And she went home after that and went on a diet for a while. I would say she was right on the money in terms of condition at that show. Not too fat, but she certainly had enough to really appreciate what that heifer had going on. And I think that's the important thing here. They got to have enough condition to appreciate their dimension and what they bring to the table, and maybe kind of get a visual of what they'll look like as cows down the road, but keeping them fresh and elegant in terms of their general presence. And so that one went home after OYE. She actually got slicked off, and we'll talk about that here a bit later, but went on a diet and got leaned up and freshened up. And she's, again, just kind of hanging out. She's coasting, eating around bale, standing outside. We'll get started on her here in about a week or so. But she's not really eating much of anything right now. I think they got a protein tub out for her. She's getting a scoop of full body. And then here again in a couple weeks, based off of how she responds to feed, and that one's always been pretty easy keeping. We'll start adding in a few more things. But in all honesty, that one's going to eat full body as a majority of her diet for quite a while. And then we can kind of build her up in the last, I would say, month prior to junior nationals with some grower feed. But that one was fun to have around. She's always been kind of an easy doer. And so that one will wait until a little bit later to start adding in some of that grower, start adding in some of those calories again to get her built back up to show readiness.
So when you're feeding full body right now, Nick, to that heifer, getting ready to maybe start pushing on her a little more, how many pounds? Because your scoop's different than my scoop's different than Brad's scoop. So when just to give a rough idea on the poundage.
Yeah, it's just a couple pounds, I would say. And I'm probably guilty of talking about things in feed scoop. I think in the cattle realm, it seems like that's kind of a common increment. We all kind of have the similar plastic feed scoop. She's getting a feed scoop of full body, and it would probably be a lot smarter to go weigh that. So I had an actual assessment of it. But in the heifer ring, it seems like so much more than anything else, you're just feeding for an appearance versus a weight or something that's calculated. And so that was kind of come to the right amount based off of she's leaned up, and that still kind of keeps her body shape correct. And so as little amount as we can, but still keeping her body progressing in the right direction is what we're doing on that particular heifer. But it's just a couple pounds. It's nothing crazy.
So Nick, I want to talk a little. Okay, so this heifer's maxed out at OIU right there, right? Obviously did really well. The mindset of we're going to take her out, kick her out on a round bale. We're going to keep maintaining her rumen with the round bale, keep maintaining her rumen with her full body. Let her calories, her daily requirements that her body's creating every day, clean her up. You're not adding anything to burn off fat or anything. You're just letting her natural calorie demands every day start burning off whatever bloom that she had right there, because you're going to get her ready in your mind a second time. You're not trying to keep her ready perfect the whole time. We always say like, oh, we'll just let them be pigs or we'll let them be cattle or whatever it is. But I think that is such an important thing of letting them be cattle, kick them out. And I'm guessing that heifer doesn't look anything like that right now as far as bloom and,
Nick's like, no, she's the killer. She still looks like a gangster.
Bloomy.
Yeah, she looks good, but like we talk about all the time, they can't look like champions every day.
Yes. Looking like that. Yeah, you don't want them looking like that. It'd be hard to maintain fat like that at a certain time. So good cattle can lean up and be cattle. And I would still bet she's got that kind of body and she's got that kind of dimension. She's just not fat. And so what I'm getting at is how long can you get one bloomy again? What kind of window when you pull that thing back in?
Yeah, I think if they've gotten to that point again, that's something that's so important, Brad. In these heifers, you kind of build them back up more times, considerably more times than what you do a steer, where you kind of have one goal in mind. We're feeding this calf, this steer for one show, and that is his day. To where a heifer, there's times in these things' lives where we might get them built back up for what we consider a big day for them a half a dozen times. And so you can never push too far past kind of that readiness spectrum because it screws you up for the remainder of their show career. And I think that's why we continue to keep freshness in mind, and obviously we want a cow to be fresh because it keeps them, with more longevity when you put them back into production. But I'm not going to tell you that it's not mainly in the show barn just so we can get more success out of them through the remainder of their show career. And so that's part of why I think you want to keep them so fresh. But as far as how long it takes them to build back up, there's a debate amongst guys, and everybody does it a little bit differently. I'll tell you, and this is something that's frustrating in these conversations, every animal's different. They are. But I would say I would be thinking about it no later than 6 weeks out from your show. And there's some cattle that react crazy, and you can get them fleshed back up in 2 weeks, 10 days. There's those kind of unicorns that don't take very much, and they're probably a little bit more in the British-based breeds, the Herefords or the Angus, where you kind of show them a kernel of corn and they're bloomed back up and ready to go. But I would say in my experience, And I probably get them to lean back down a little bit harder than some guys, but I would definitely be thinking about getting them built back up or feeding them back up, because it needs to be a slow process, no later than 6 weeks out from your show.
Great info. Very good.
Yeah. Well, it gives you a plan, right? Because I think, it's really the only species that we're showing bred to. I mean, like when you think about it, nobody else
Supposedly.
has this. Yeah. But it's such a vital, important part of it, right? And so getting them freshened up right, getting them bred, keeping them bred through that window, and then turning around and getting them ready for those junior nationals, all while thinking about what we're going to talk about here in a second is that hair cycle too. Is I think one of the most amazing thing that cattle people do is I see stuff like the Illinois Beef Expo, all the Iowa Beef Expo. Maybe that might be a shot young, or early. But it's interesting to me, like after a show that you build up, and that's their kind of calf first big show, and then we'll watch them schlick those things off, and like all the work that went into that. But it kind of goes back to what we said earlier of thinking about the end. And the mid or beginning part of that. So having the patience to kick that heifer out, I think is extremely important.
Yeah, great info. So let's keep rolling here. So let's go to number 3. Again, we've got 4 topics tonight. This will be the third, obviously. So what kind of work should we be doing or shouldn't be doing now? And again, we're kind of gearing the conversation tonight towards, let's say we're 100 days out, approximately. From your target show. So, today it's April 19th, 100 days from today, you're about the 1st of August. So a lot of county fairs fall in that category up here in the Midwest. And then obviously our state fairs aren't far from that either. So let's kind of talk, what work we should or shouldn't be doing right now to be preparing for success later in the summer.
Yeah, and I don't know that this needs to be laid into quite as hard as some of our other points as far as just how deep we go into it, but it's something that I wanted to bring up because I get these questions often this time of year. Do I need to be rinsing them every day, or do I need to have them tied and in the barn already? Hopefully your calf is broke, and I would say, and not all of them are. Sometimes you got one late, and you got to start breaking on them now. And if that's the case, I would go ahead and start working on that animal. But if your animal is broke, hopefully been to a show and just kind of knows the ropes a little bit by now, to me right now is a good time to freshen them up. And not just so much in terms of condition, but Nathan and I were talking about this the other day. I think cattle still respond to being cattle in the sense that it seems like when you freshen them up by kicking them out, you also get them to increase their appetite just a bit more when you bring them back in the barn. It seems like their movement gets a little bit better. They loosen up. And so all those things kind of prepare yourself for that final push. And so not only is it good for your animal right now to maybe not have as much workload, this is a busy time of year for kids and families too. And I think we all need to be aware of that. Sometimes we expect some of these show families to be out there, rinse them twice a day, make sure you're out there working with them all the time. But there's not all those hours in the day. And like Nathan kicked it off by saying, there's sports going on right now. People are involved in all kinds of events. And so this is a time frame here where you can focus on your family, go try to be a world champion baseball player, and you don't have to be killing yourself right this moment. I think it's smart, in my opinion, to be starting to work on those animals again in the sense of let's give them 2 baths a week, or let's go tie them up a couple times in the week, whether that's, one night when you're not baseballing during the week, and let's go give them a good bath and work with them for a couple hours one day on the weekend. I think that's a good manageable workload right now for most all of us to attain. And then start kind of keeping yourself fresh too, because those kind of dog days of summers that we all talk about where you do got to be standing in the barn working hard on them, those are coming. And so for both you and your animal to keep yourself fresh right now, and just be planning about how to really lay into that workload here in a couple of weeks or a month, I think is important. But for sure, whenever school lets out, let's go ahead and lay into those things. Let's start pimping on them and making them look like show champions. But here for the next couple of weeks, I think it's okay to start working them into it and working yourself into it based off of kind of the summer shows. And, you know, if you do have an early county fair, maybe you do need to be starting to work on those things now and thinking about it. But again, that goes back to how far out you are from your show, what your goal is, and you got to kind of set that yourself as well.
Yeah, great info there.
I don't know if this is really on topic, but I'll say it anyway. You know me, I'm always getting us off topic. When you're talking about kicking these cattle out, Nick, tell me what your ideal kick out pasture or run looks like, and then tell me what the bare minimum, and then tell me what it can't look like.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we're all limited to what we have. And so, you know, perfect world, if we could have, I don't even know what the perfect size would be, like a 20 by 100 pen, something in that range, something where they can legitimately get out, move, exercise, loosen up. I like to have water on one side of the pen and feed them on the other side of the pen so they're using their entire pen. And I don't know, as I said that out loud, if that is necessarily the right size. Something that you would look out and say, that is a sizable run. That is a sizable pen to kick my calf into. And maybe that's something I did it whenever I was growing up because we didn't have these, you know, quote unquote perfect show runs. And so I went and I hot wired off a part of my dad's pasture. That's what I used.
Yep.
And it had a little shade tree in it that they could go hover under when it did start to get warm. But it was big enough that they could legitimately get out, hoof it, get some real exercise. I fed them on one side, the water was on the other, so that they had to use their entire pen. As far as what it can't look like, I would say, and again, I'm going to use kind of broad terms, a small pen where they're standing on concrete. If we can avoid that by any means, try to avoid that, because so many times in the summer, we do put them in a barn and put them under fans. And so they're pretty cooped up. And so if you got them cooped up right now, and especially if they're standing on concrete, it's just pretty hard on them, especially as we're adding weight. We expect a lot out of these livestock by adding all this weight onto them. And I think you got to keep their structure and joints in mind whenever we're doing that. And so to me, it's just keep them in a big pen where they can use that entire pen and try to keep them off of a small pen and on concrete as much as you can.
You know,
I hope that answers your question. I don't know if it really does.
Because I think a lot of people are trying to do the right thing, and you know, they don't want to kick them out with the cows. And I'm not saying they need to be running with cows by any means, but having that run, and I think if you got grass, that's great. Really, concrete, big no. It's hard on them. And I think the other thing is if we can avoid the mud as we get into the spring season here, you know, I'm not too worried about mud from like a tag standpoint. I think we're all smart enough not to let them get that muddy. And this time of the year, it seems like hoof health is something that always sneaks up on you in the spring, where you're battling foot rot and stuff. If it's a spot where you've got some other commercial cattle or just coming, where we can have a bad spot of foot rot. So we're not telling you not to be paying attention to stuff. We got to be, you know, checking on health every day and letting the cattle move and looking at them. And you know, something like hoof rot, foot rot is something you better get on them quick and understand what that looks like. A lot of people, you know, if you're new and you see them limping, you think there's something wrong with them in a joint or something, and really be paying attention this time of the year. You know, this is a really good time for you guys to let the cattle freshen up, let your mind freshen up, but we really want to be paying attention to the stuff that can creep up and cause a big problem later. So
I can smell that copper tox, baby. I can smell it.
Yeah. I think you can make it through this season without it. You know, I know that, and what I've found too is there's certain pins that you just get it in there. It's tough to get it out. So you need to be really paying attention.
I would tell you my runs, and if you're looking for like an ideal size, and it's what I've kind of based it off of, and I probably shot it a little small in my initial throw out, but they're 50 by 200. And I think that's a good size.
Yeah.
And that's a good size too, where you could put 2 of them in there, 3 of them in there. And you could put all of them in that run and get a good amount of exercise. But that would be kind of what our typical run size is here.
And I like what you said. I mean, if you've got this kind of space, go out there and, you know, hot wire's cheap. you know.
For sure.
So get you a spot and yeah, perfect, cool.
Yeah, good combo. So let's jump to our. We're pushing up against an hour here, so it goes so fast, right? But let's jump up into our kind of our last topic. And again, if you're just jumping on here and tuning in and watching, feel free to drop in your questions. You know, we're always we're always happy to take questions and answer questions. So feel free to stick those there in the chat. We'll bring them up onto the screen too. That always seems to work pretty well. So our last topic that we're going to touch on here tonight is understanding the hair cycle. And so this was, I'll be honest, this was a question that I had a lot of questions about myself as a guy that's got receding hairline, and it all happened to grow up here instead of up here anymore. But I think just kind of understanding what that means, right? Like what really does that mean? Because I think it's one of those things, like you hear people talking about it, and what does it really mean, Nick?
Yeah, I think I would say this is what I get. The majority of questions about this time of year is just what do I need to do to set myself up for success from a hair standpoint? And so I'll start off by saying a typical hair cycle on a calf is 90 to 120 days. And that's kind of dependent on their genetics. And so there's a couple different ways that you can go ahead and set yourself up for success in terms of hair cycle. We talked about it the other day, and these guys are making fun of me. I go off of the Farmer's Almanac and find a good hair day. You can go ahead and jump on there and find that. It's based off of the moon cycle, but it'll tell you a good hair day to cut hair to increase hair growth. And so what we'll do is we'll find one of those good hair days, and we'll actually down shear those heifers. And I'll talk about heifers first because I think there's some differences amongst steers and heifers. We'll down shear those heifers. And it's the majority kind of the sides of their body. Will leave their lower quarter, their legs, their belly line, and shave about everything else, leave their tail head as well. And I think what that does is it resets everything. It gets you down to where you're doing nothing but growing completely fresh hair at that point in time. And so we'll do that if we're showing at Junior Nationals, kind of a end of March time frame, middle of March time frame. And we'll go ahead and shear those things off. And then what we were talking about the other day is you kind of, again, let them hang out for a little bit. You don't need to go out there and rinse them every day. The hair is growing on its own. And again, it's all fresh growth. And so then whenever you do put them back in the barn, you do start rinsing on them again and brushing on them, you're getting good, fresh hair coming back. Now, if maybe you're a little later in the game and you were a little nervous to shear them off, and I've been at that point before. There's some, gray ones or some different genetics that I've seen. They don't shear off and grow the hair back near as good. We'll go out there with a shedder comb, which you can buy those at insert your favorite supply company. And what you'll do is you'll comb them down. They're double-sided, depending on your thickness of hair. And what you're doing is you're pulling all the dead hair out. And so by combing those down, you're pulling the dead hair that's not growing anymore out. And you'll need to do that for probably about a week, once a day, to get all the dead hair out. And then again, you're down to fresh growth after that. I know back in the day, Nathan showed steers, Brad showed as well. And these guys will probably get a smirk by saying this. We used grill bricks, which were terrible.
Rip it out.
Yeah, you would get way more of the brick on your hands and just burn through those bricks like they were nothing. But that's what we used prior to the shedder combs. I would avoid those if you can. We've come up with a lot better technology since then. But
that creates
just miserable. But anyway, you can get that dead hair out, so that way you're doing nothing but growing fresh. I think now is the time of year to do that. Hopefully you've started on that already. And if you're going to shear them off, you needed to probably do that a couple of weeks ago, a couple of weeks to a month ago, depending on where you live. And if you're kind of in colder climates, be aware of that. If you shear them off early, you might need to put them in the barn when you get some cold nights. On steers, I will tell you most of the steer guys will not shear them off. And I think there's a couple different reasons for that. They always have a little bit more of a constant fresh hair growth underneath. And so when you shear them off, you're kind of moving yourself backwards and you're kind of killing yourself as far as what's already under there anyways. And so for the most part, steer guys would use that shedder comb. You're going in there. You're probably going to use the thicker of the two sides, and you're trying to get, again, all of the dead stuff out. Again, I think it's good to be doing it this time of year, or depending on when your show is, what are we, 100 days out probably from most shows. So
Yep.
regardless of where you live, I would say about 120 days out, I would try to get down to fresh hair growth, try to get all the dead stuff out. Let's get ourselves to a point where we're doing nothing but growing fresh hair. And I think that's really going to set yourself up for a successful time frame in those later kind of pushing months. Because I've just seen it all too many times where someone will go out there and they didn't hear about this initial step of getting the dead stuff out, and they're working really hard. But it seems like then that last month, all they're doing is dead hairs falling out. They really just don't have enough true growth coming back to make that calf look their absolute best. And they'll come to the show, and by that point, it's mostly fresh hair, but there's just not a whole lot of it because it's kind of almost stifled that hair underneath by all the old dead stuff on top. And they're kind of just wondering, why don't I have as much hair as everybody else? And I think that's a major reason right there, is they had some of that. They were honestly working on dead hair for the majority of the time.
Yeah.
And you can't get that stuff to grow. So
I think a prime candidate is actually the calf that we saw earlier. That'd be a really good one to start getting all that cleaned up, blow
just get it out.
Be surprised getting that one, how much fresher that calf would look by getting all that dead hair out and doing that. So what if you're at this point, you said we're 90 to 120 days on a hair cycle. So calves that are going to show in the summer, and that be their terminal endpoint, let's say, we're already through one of those hair cycles, and let's say we're genetically, we're like, I'm not seeing it. I need everything that I can get.
Yeah.
This is where we're going to push a product, and I want you to tell us like how you use it, because honestly, sometimes we do a little, we get to talking about processes and not products sometimes, but how do you work Epic in that? So we're 120 days out, and you're coming in on a new hair cycle. Where would you feed Epic in that hair cycle, before, after, the whole time?
Yeah, I think awesome. And I was going to bring that up here next. I think it's important to get Epic in there at 120 days. And the reason why I would do it at that limit of 120 is I'm not scared of them spitting hair because it's a non-melatonin product. There's some of those other products out there that are melatonin based that they kind of hit a wall, and then all of a sudden their hair starts falling out, to where Epic is non-melatonin based. And so you can continue to feed that through, and you can actually stretch their hair cycle with Epic. So if you need to feed it at 120, and we didn't do just the greatest at our county fair, and so we're going to go to this next show. Maybe it's our state fair. So you could feed Epic, and what I do, and it's a little off label, and we're not supposed to talk about that on these, but I will actually increase Epic, the amount that I feed, just a little bit if I decide then to go to another show and kind of try to stretch their hair cycle. And it works awesome from that standpoint, again, because it's a non-melatonin based hair supplement. You can use it with a little bit more versatility in there. But yeah, I think 120 days is smart to start using Epic. And it doesn't have to be on, shy haired ones or kind of flatter haired ones. Even the best of haired ones, if you could have more hair, it'd be a great situation. So I use it on all of them.
I can tell you this, if I wouldn't give up either. If you've got one that you think slick haired, that tiny bit of hair growth, looking at these slick calves down in the South, and if you see a calf that he's slicked off and he's going from one show to another, and you go in there and he's grown back just that little bit of fuzz, I mean, 1/8 of an inch of hair is an incredible advantage over one that's so. If that's all you think you can get, I would really push it, because, I always tell our kids that we're judging livestock with, we're not going for the biggest boned animal. We're going for the appearance of the biggest boned animal, right? And so I like that. I like knowing the appearance of things, because that's where it's in our control, right? And bringing it back to stuff that we can control is, well, how do we make this animal appear to be bigger boned, or change the shape of its hind leg if you have that much hair? And
where I think Epic is so good is it actually helps with their base coat, and it kind of adds more density to their hair. And so on some of those flatter haired ones, or ones that aren't blessed with for whatever reason, genetics, they're just not blessed with near as much hair. If you can just get it to stand up or stand out and away from their body, even those kind of flatter haired ones, if you can get it worked and get a little bit more base to their hair, you can make them look so different than when it's laying flat to their body. And so use those advantages, use Epic, go out there and put some elbow grease into it, and you can still take one that's maybe a little bit shy on hair. And if you do the right things and get it prepared the right way, you can certainly still make that calf look awfully good.
Yeah. Well, we're right up against about an hour, so never ceases to amaze me how quick that hour can go. Yeah. So if we didn't have a huge crowd tonight, but I'm sure we had the right crowd, right? We had the right people that needed to hear hopefully what we had to say. And so we'll kind of give it a last go around. If you've got any questions, Holly, to answer your question, we're getting more Sunglo in Central Florida. I would say we're doing our best, and that can be a tough part of the country in some ways for us, but we're doing our best to get you as much as we can down there. So hopefully here you're going to start seeing a shot more of our products in that part of the world. So yeah, appreciate you guys joining us again. If you've got any questions here, feel free to drop them in. We'll stay on here another 5 minutes or so, and then call it.
And I would also say, even if you don't have any questions immediately, throw in the chat kind of what you want us to talk about next time. And if you guys are just kind of hanging out and, something's you're watching and maybe you're just, right there. Like I was going to say, maybe you're a pig person and listening.
Yeah.
We'll jump on to a pig one as well. And I would tell you, Haley, we're going to probably get a little more regular on our cadence with these. Yeah. So we're going to let you guys dictate kind of what we discuss. And so we're always down to talk about show pigs. And so
Nick's tired of talking about show pigs. He wants to talk about his cows.
I actually, we don't, I know we're going over our hour, but I actually, and just to tell you guys, when we get together as a team, we always kind of bounce ideas. Nick and I, we work closely together down here in the South. But if you don't think I had some of these show cattle, his secrets getting put on my pigs this year, you're wrong. And I had this, it is crazy, the approach, how similar some of this stuff is. I'm not halter breaking him anytime soon, but a lot of the stuff that he does, we try to have the same approach. And
I have seen that at a show before, PS.
Oh boy. But I will say there's a lot of crossover stuff. So, if you're a cattle guy and you want to listen to some of the pig stuff, maybe you'll learn how to put a back in one as well. Because I know Nick and I have shared some of that stuff, just how different we go at stuff, but at the same time, how similar a lot of this stuff is.
Yeah, Holly, I think I'm reading here that, where's Holly from? Is she one of the ones from Florida?
No.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep. So with your shows, and you're not showing during the summer, and so you're kind of trying to coast or just hang out during the summertime. And obviously with your Florida heat, it makes it a little bit difficult. I would, again, like we've talked about before, try to get them to the right kind of condition, whether that's feeding them a little bit harder early with some grower, adding in a little bit of finisher early and getting them to a bit more of a desired appearance before it gets miserable hot. And then you can back off and just feed kind of a lesser amount of some grower and add in some full body, keep them on a round bale there. I think is certainly important. But I know I've helped some families there in Florida, and it gets pretty hot. And with you guys showing later in the year, you're more or less trying to maintain or just hang out there during the summertime. And so I think it's important to get them a little bit more ready now before it gets just dirty hot, and then you can crank them back up later. You got a little bit more time on your hands.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. Thanks for watching too. Okay, if we got, it's like we're caught up over there on the question side. So again, this is recorded, right? So we'll have this thing put back up on our Facebook page, and then put back up on our YouTube channel as well. So we've got all of our other Sunglo Facebook Lives on our YouTube channel. So be sure you check out those two. Lots of great information. And again, this is one of our favorite things we do. So be looking to see us more often here in the coming weeks. So thank you guys so much. And we appreciate your business, and we thank you guys for stepping in and hanging out with us tonight. Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
Thank you.